Good morning. Thanks to the IWCOA for having me come up today. I was at Lyons Township last year for their regional and was kind of overwhelmed, like some of you today, how large this place is. It's a lot different than our Central Illinois and Southern Illinois schools that you go to, and it's just a one building spot. But it's a great place for wrestling, great day for all of you to learn about wrestling. And I'm here today. Don invited me to come up and talk about IHSA issues. Stop me at any time if you've got questions. Try to be an open book, try to be as transparent as possible so people understand where we are now and where we're looking at going for some future topics. So let's get started. We'll end at about 10:15, but again, if you've got questions anytime, stop me, ask me, and we'll figure this out. Girls wrestling is a hot topic, no doubt. Just giving you some data from our database this year. We had 451 girls statewide that were body fat tested. We all know that that's done at the beginning of the season, and sometimes those girls stay with the sport and sometimes they don't. Just like in every other sport, kids don't stick with sports for whatever reason. So at the end of this year, I sent a survey out to our coaches to ask them how many girls from that 451 early in the season were still active on your team at the end of the year, showing up to practice every day, coming to meets, participating, etc. Just so we have a better number of how many kids are sticking with it. And only about half of our coaches responded to the survey, and that's okay. But even the half that did respond told us that about 225 girls were still actively showing up to practice every day, participating with their team until the end of the season. So if you do the math, you're kind of thinking, well, if half of them reported 225, does that mean that if all of them would have reported, would that number have doubled to 450, which matches how many were body fat tested early in the season? We don't know that for sure. That's just a guess on my part. But we have hundreds of girls participating in IHSA wrestling in Illinois. So where do we go from here with this growing trend? It's an exciting time. I met with some folks in our IHSA office just a few weeks ago to talk about this very topic. Girls wrestling has been approved as state tournaments in other states around the country. We have some models there to look at if we ever go down that road. But some things we have to consider. Tony Clark, as most of you know, is our top official. And Tony's also on the National Federation Rules Committee. And he just went to Indianapolis last week to go to their annual rules interpretation meeting, and where they go through the rule book and consider rule changes for the future. Tony learned through the NFHS that every state has the ability to set their own weight classes for girls. Even though you won't see that language in the rule book, you know, the 14 weight classes we have are for boys wrestling, and girls right now wrestle in those weight classes. But we can create our own weight classes for girls. Several states have done that. As I said, we have some models to look at to consider what works best for us in Illinois. And I know many people want to say, just like with 8-man football these days, 8-man football is a growing trend in Illinois with some small schools that can't field an 11-man team. A lot of schools say, well, we'd like to play 8-man football because that works for us. When are we going to have a state championship in 8-man football? Well, let's slow down. Let's walk before we run on issues like this. There's a lot of things to figure out and iron out before we ever get to an Illinois girls state championship. But I think the trend shows us we're headed in that direction. I don't know exactly what that looks like. But what I mean by a lot of details to figure out, and Tony and I have talked about a lot of these over the last few weeks, is, you know, what do we do with the weight control plan? Right now, kids are body fat tested, and the weight control plan shows them what of the 14 weight classes they can wrestle at on certain dates. If we develop our own girls' weight classes, what's that going to look like with the weight control plan? That's something we got to figure out. If we ever do get to a point where we offer a state series in girls wrestling, where does it fit in the calendar? We all know that the state finals weekend in Champaign is very packed tight, and we're going to talk about some new ideas that might pack it even tighter for the future if we go down that road. Where do we put a girls' state tournament? Where do we put the sectionals? Are there enough girls participating to have a regional and a sectional and a state final like we do for boys? A lot of those things are unanswered right now, but we'll figure those out as we go. The first thing I think we need to do is establish some weight classes for girls and some opportunities for girls to participate in either regular season meets or tournaments with other girls at those specific weight classes. I believe the IWCOA has 12, is that right? 12 weight classes? Some states have 10, some states have 12, some states, Tony, I think you've learned, some states
have as low as 8.
As low as 8?
As high as 14.
Okay. Those states that had 14, are they using the traditional 14 that are in the rule book?
No,
or are they different numbers?
They have established weight classes for the females.
Okay. So our Wrestling Advisory Committee meets on April 18th. Anybody in here members of the advisory committee? I don't think I see any familiar faces. But anyway, some of you may have been on the advisory committee in the past. We meet April 18th. We're going to talk about this topic. The first step is to establish some weight classes so girls can participate against other girls. All right? Any questions about that? Okay. State finals ideas. We have our regional reps meeting every year, and I know these hot topics have been there for many years. What about true wrestlebacks at state? Again, April 18th, our advisory committee is going to meet about that. True wrestlebacks, just putting pencil to paper and figuring out brackets, would add about 4 hours to our already busy weekend in Champaign. We have a very busy Thursday, as you know, a very busy Friday. Saturday is packed tight with all the awards and things at the end too. But it would add about 4 total hours to the weekend. There's different schedule options to consider. What do we do on Thursday? Do we start a little bit earlier and run later into the night? What do we do on Friday? What does that look like? How do we squeeze more wrestling in to our already busy weekend? If we do go to a true wrestleback option and don't perhaps have everybody wrestling at the same time, is there a way to do staggered weigh-ins so the teams that wrestle later in the day, maybe they don't have to show up so early? That makes sense to me on the surface, but there's some logistics there to figure out and making sure we've got traffic flow and can have enough people there to make sure the staggered weigh-ins work with our schedule in Champaign. Again, the Wrestling Advisory meets on April 18th. We're going to talk about these topics and see what we can do from there. These are members of our committee this year. If you know those folks, the top 6 guys are coaches. Dave Harris is the principal at Belleville-Altoff, and most of you know Dan Fulsher is an official from Lincoln. If you know those folks between now and April 18th and want to give them some of your opinion, friendly opinion I'm sure, some advice, some thoughts, you can look those up on our IHSA website and contact those people at their schools and tell them what's on your mind about either girls wrestling, state finals ideas, and what you think might work. All right? Any questions about state finals ideas? Yes, sir.
Seems to me like in our state tournament, there's 4 variables. They all work together. Obviously the bracketing, the double elimination, adding more participants, adding more time to the schedule, or adding number of mats. And just looking at the gym floor at the assembly hall, it appears to me that another mat can be added to that facility. Have you considered adding more mats to the...
We have considered that. We went down last year and measured the floor because for years people said, well, just add 2 more mats. Mm-hmm. We can't add 2 safely. Okay. We could add 1. Okay. So then the consideration has to be, well, adding 1, how much time will that help us shave off the weekend to make it more efficient, I guess. So that is a consideration to think about adding a 7th mat over toward the side where we do the awards area. There's enough floor space there to do that. Maybe add that for Thursday and a little bit of Friday and then take it away as the tournament gets flowing along farther. So, good question.
The other question then, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Follow-up question is I know that you've received a lot of feedback regarding the number of participants, the disparity between the different classes and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Has there ever been any consideration of moving the state tournament to a facility that would allow more mats?
I've been at the IHSA for 2 years, and I'll just say directly, not in my time.
Okay.
No. Facilities have to put out bids to host that, so there would have to be a facility that A, wants to host an event like that for 3 full days. A facility that has enough staff to put that on. And yes, there are facilities in the state that could put 8, 10, maybe even 12 mats on the floor. But does that, again, do they want to? Does that fit financially for our plan to make sure the dollars balance out the right way? We've had a great relationship with Champaign for decades, as you know. They do a great job there. We show up, we don't have to tell them how to set up. They know the routine from year to year. It's a pretty smooth process. But yeah, there's consideration when those contracts come up after, usually it's a 5-year contract with a site like that, and then it's open for bids. And in some sports, we only get 1 bid. In some sports, we might get 3 or 4 bids that we get to choose from. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm Matt Peterson, official from Crystal Lake, and I'm just asking this because I'm curious. Does the state tournament make money for the IHSA, or does it cost the IHSA money?
We profit, I'll say, a little bit from the state tournament. The profitability part is mainly from regionals and sectionals. The state tournament is a very expensive weekend to run, as you can imagine. The cost is always in the people that you pay and the State Farm Center workers that we pay and buying meals and food for officials and people like that. So it's an expensive weekend. We do profit a little bit, but it's not, it's not anything that's going to pay anybody's salary, so to speak. So, good question. Thanks. Yeah. And it's pretty much that way in a lot of our sports. Basketball, football. Yeah, we do profit on the state finals weekends, but the profitability comes from the earlier rounds of the playoffs, the regionals, the sectionals, the playoff games in football, etc. All right, so again, contact advisory committee members if you want to talk to them. Let's just talk about the change process real quick. I think a lot of people think that the IHSA makes all these decisions. And yes, we have a staff in our office that works every day, but we're usually not the decision makers. It starts from the advisory committee level, and every sport has one: wrestling, soccer, golf, football, etc. And then when those folks at that committee level make a recommendation, it goes next to a committee of athletic administrators, ADs from all over the state, who look at it kind of with those questions you just asked. Is it feasible? Does it work? Does it fit the schedule? Does it fit the calendar? Can we do this reasonably? And then after they approve or reject it, then our staff looks at it. And ultimately, like in a school situation, we have a board of directors who makes the final decision on important recommendations like that. So that's kind of the change process, the way it works, the advisory committee level. And I probably should have put a layer underneath there of coaches and officials who can give the advisory committee members their opinions on certain things. Right now we do have an ad hoc committee studying classification, and I mean all facets of classification, from percentages in each class, the multiplier waiver language, and the success adjustment language. Is wrestling a team sport, or is it an individual sport? Yes. Good question. He says yes. Wrestling is currently classified as a team sport. And that means in three-class team sports, we put 33.33% of our teams in 1A, 2A, and 3A. Sounds like a nice, even balance, all right? Individual sports in three classes, like boys golf, for example, cross country, track and field, are divided like this. 1A has 40%, 2A and 3A have 30% in each class. And because of these numbers I'm going to share with you, some people are recommending that wrestling goes from a team sport where there's 33% in each class to an individual sport where it's 40, 30, 30. Here's a big reason why. Over the last 3 school years, 16, 17, and 18, these are the number of brackets at the regional level that had 3 or fewer wrestlers in them. This is statewide, all right? As you know, 3 kids in each weight class advance from the regional to the sectional. So that means in this many brackets, all those kids in those brackets were automatically advancing to the sectional without even having to win a match, all right? At the 1A level, there were 70 brackets statewide over the past 3 years, 2A 29, and you can see what 3A had. So we're getting some feedback from 3A folks to say, change from 33% each, just put more teams in 1A, so maybe those numbers, 70 and 29, will decrease. Now, no matter how we slice the pie, there still might be a few brackets every year, as you know, you wrestling people know, that are going to have 3 people in them, 4 people in them, 2 people in them. We can't really control that. But the thinking is if we push more teams into 2A and 1A, especially 1A, that number 70 might decrease. So what happens if we do that? Here's the data. If we change wrestling from a team sport to an individual and put 40% of schools in 1A, 30 in 2A, 30 in 3A, 28 teams, and this is using this year's data, this school year, 28 teams would move from 2A down into 1A. And then 14 teams would move from 3A down to 2A. The enrollment cutoffs would go from the current 1A cutoff is at 639 this year, it would go to 777. And 2A would go from 1588 up to 1721. Now you might be alarmed at those numbers, but the difference between, let me see if I can get my pointer going right, the difference between the current 639 and 1588, and the 777 to 1721 is almost identical. I think it's like 949 to 944 or something like that, all right? So the spread is not going to change that much in 2A, but I can certainly hear folks in 1A saying, whoa, we've got schools in 1A now that are at 639 kids, and we would be going to 777 kids. If that changes, it happens, that's exactly what would happen. 28 teams would move from 2A to 1A, 14 down from 3A to 2A. All in an effort to change those numbers. And I think most people who think about sports and competition would agree that it's probably not a great tournament setup to allow kids to automatically advance from regional to sectional without really having to win. And that's not what we're set up about the competition aspect of that. So, any questions or thoughts about numbers? Don?
Well, not so much the numbers.
Okay.
The obvious thing is if you switch it to an individual sport, you're not going to be a dual team state. Is that correct?
I didn't say that.
Okay.
That has never been brought up on the table. Has never been brought up. But people who look at that might say, whoa, time out. How does wrestling have an individual tournament and a team tournament, and track doesn't, or golf doesn't, or cross country doesn't? A lot of people ask that now. And
Wrestling has basically gotten everything they've asked for.
What's that?
Over the past 15 years.
Wrestling has?
It seems to be.
Okay. Yeah.
I would disagree with that. Yeah, definitely.
More than any other sport, where we have an individual championship and a dual team championship. And
If that's the criteria, then yeah, but there's a lot of things wrong with wrestling right now. A lot.
Well,
So that's not, I don't know if that's exactly, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disagree with you, but
No.
there's a lot of things that can be changed in wrestling to make it better.
Yeah.
So, and it's not, we haven't gotten what we asked for, at least that's the information I have, so.
Okay. Yeah, Lou.
If you make those changes, how much is geography gonna have an impact on that?
It certainly will, yeah. When we look at our regionals right now and we have a map and we assign teams to regionals, we try to keep the travel distance to a reasonable amount. We wouldn't change the number of regionals, we wouldn't change the number of sectionals, it would just change the number of teams that are in there. What this would do in 2A and 3A primarily, it would be really close to having just 8 teams in each 2A and 3A regional. So you would think if most of those schools have a full lineup, you're going to have a nice, smooth 8-man bracket in most of those regionals. Okay? At the 1A level, it would mean that most of those regionals would have 10 or 11, maybe 12 schools in them. Which again, you would think would help fill up those 8-man brackets that are missing some pieces right now. Again, no matter how we slice this, there are going to be regionals, and we can't control it, that just have, 2 kids in that weight class. There's nothing you can do about it. So those numbers are never going to all be 0, I don't think. But the goal is to try to trim those down a little bit. Again, this is not an IHSA office decision. We have an ad hoc committee meeting, April 25th. We've met several times this year, and this is just one of the main topics on their agenda. All right. The weight control plan, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but just so make sure people understand, science and data tells a wrestler his or her safe weight at which he or she can wrestle. Every wrestler's descent plan is different. It's the most unique thing I think we do. If you're a golfer, if you're a swimmer, if you're a track and field athlete, you can participate at whatever events you want to participate in. But wrestling, you get narrowed down into a certain window of what weights where you can wrestle. The IHSA website stores the data for all schools. It's not a public view that parents and media and officials can see. It's in the school center where only coaches and athletic directors can go in and see that. And certainly coaches should be showing their kids on paper, or at least having them look over their shoulder on computer about their weight descent plan. Everyone's different. Here are some sample ones. These are from just various schools around the state that I pulled off our website. For example, in the first one, this kid has some options on his or her plan, all right? Early in the season, that person can weigh 182 on or after November 14th. If they want to descend, they can go down to 170 either on or after November 22nd. If they want to go even further, they can go down to 160 either on or after December 20th. Now when I say on or after, what I mean by that is For example, if this school, this kid's school, had a meet on December 20th, if that kid wants to go to 160 at any time during the season, he or she has to make scratch 160 on that meet on December 20th and then wrestle that night to certify at 160. All right? Let's say that schedule, let's say they don't have one on December 20th, but they have a match on December 21st or 22nd. Or maybe they don't, they don't wrestle again until the holiday tournament on December 28th, for example. All right? Either on that date or on the first meet after that date. Does that make sense? I think coaches in here understand what I'm talking about. All right? If that kid wants to go 160 and he shows up to that meet on December 20th and he doesn't make scratch 160, he's 161.6. He doesn't make scratch, but he goes ahead and wrestles that night at 170. That means he can't ever go 160 again the rest of the season. That's off the table for him. His body is telling him, you can't go that low. So he has to go either 170 or the rule says you can wrestle one weight class higher than that if you choose. All right? But if he does make scratch 160 on December 20th and wrestles that night, then he's certified at 160. Does that mean he has to go 160 the rest of the season? No. It just means he can. All right? He might bounce up to 170 the next one and then bounce back down to 160 the next one and bounce back and forth. And come regional time, he realizes 160 is where I want to be, it's where I feel the best, then he can go to 160. But if 160 doesn't work, he tries it for 2 or 3 matches, and it doesn't work for him, then he can go back up to 170 if he wants to. He's got some flexibility. When you get over here on the right side, that kid doesn't have any flexibility, all right? His body, he must be pretty lean, but this is an actual kid's weight certification chart from our website. 120 is the lowest he can go, all right? And can always go up one weight class if he wants, or if he grows during the season, he can keep going up, but he can't go any lower than 120.
5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about that information? Went through some rough times this year with some teams who are in a tough spot with weight certification, especially near the end of the season. And we certainly don't want that to happen. So we're trying to do more education. I'm planning to do some videos, put together some examples that coaches and parents and wrestlers can all understand and be on the same page with weight certification, because it does get a little bit tricky sometimes with some unique situations. What can coaches do in the off season with their wrestlers? I will admit, when I was an athletic director at a new school and we had wrestling, we had the wrestling season, and then our coach is talking about going to these IWCOA events after the season. I said, hold on, season's over. How can you do that? How can you continue coaching your kids? Well, here's our bylaw that says, during the school year, so this time of year in the spring, or any time after the season, a coach can be involved with a non-school team only if the number of students from his school does not exceed half the number of participants it takes to field a team in IHSA competition. In wrestling, that number is 7. We have 14 weight classes, half of that is 7. So if you're coaching your kids this time of year in the off season, you can coach them as long as you have a maximum of 7 kids from your school on your roster. If you have 8, 9, 10, 12, 15 kids wanting to wrestle, you can't be involved at all. All right? Unless they go wrestle some other club or somebody else. You can coach 7 kids from your own school. If you got 10 kids showing up and wanting to participate, you got to have somebody else coach them. A dad, a brother, somebody you trust. You can't be involved at all. In the summer, that changes. In the summer, you get 25 contact days where you can coach 40 kids on your team if you want to. You can coach them all at the same time. All right? 25 days in the summer, you can do practices, camps, tournaments, weight room specific wrestling stuff. The last day for summer contact this summer is July 29th. All right? Officials. We need them in every sport. Wrestling, soccer, football, basketball. You know that. All right? If you know good people, whether they wrestled in high school, whether they just love the sport and want to stay involved somehow, they don't have the time commitment for coaching, they really don't want to coach or do that kind of thing, but they want to stay involved in wrestling, what a great way to stay involved, make some good extra money, encourage as many former wrestlers that you know who want to be around the sport for years and years and years. They can become an official and really help out the schools in their community and the schools on a statewide level. How many officials are in here? Just raise your hand real quick. Awesome. These guys love the sport. Did all of you wrestle at some point in high school? That's probably how you know the sport. Doesn't mean you have to be a wrestler to be a wrestling official, but most of them are, all right? But again, encourage people that want to stay involved. They're going off to college and their wrestling career is over. We can easily help them get licensed as a wrestling official. We have an officials conference coming up this summer, July 20th and 21st in East Peoria. It's a great thing for officials to get together, learn some things, clinics, mini sessions, kind of like you've got going on today. Good social time. I guarantee you it's always the hottest weekend of the summer. It's usually about 96 degrees. If it's cooler than that, we just don't do it. I'm kidding. But it's pretty warm that weekend in East Peoria. So if you know people that want to become a first-time official, a great chance for them to jump in with both feet at that conference. That's what I've got. Who has questions that either I can answer or other people in the room might be able to answer about wrestling details? Yes, sir.
Can you give us an idea of how the assignments are made for the regional bracket, the teams that...
Geography. Yeah, our handbook tells us that we have to assign them geographically in a sport like wrestling.
So, so it is geographical. So when there are schools that are passing one regional to attend a different regional, how does that happen?
Well, our map shows us a straight line shot as the crow flies from school A to the regional host site. And in some cases, you're right. Up in this area, especially when there's lots of schools packed in tight, you might drive past another regional site to get to one. But we try, number one, to do it geographically, and then we also balance the number of teams. We don't want one regional having 12 teams and the other regional having 7 teams. We try our best to balance those numbers out so it's a fair setup for everybody. But you're right. In this area, sometimes those overlaps happen. We try to keep those to an absolute minimum. Southern Illinois, Central Illinois, when teams are more spread out, that doesn't happen. But it's based on geography.
So that's the only, geography and the balancing of the number of schools is the only 2 criteria?
Correct. We do not look at who's good, who's not good. We don't look at who's a returning state champion, who's not a returning. We don't look at that stuff. In fact, our handbook says we can't. All right. I know many people would like us to, but we just don't. We do it based on geography.
We're going to have to close it now for the questions.
Okay. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.